Hi, I'm Pastor Susan Schwartz, coming to you on this absolutely beautiful autumn day to talk a little bit about what it means to be an American and to be a Christian. As citizens of the United States, we live in a nation that, from very early on, was determined that the government and religion should be separate from one another. Although many came to this country hundreds of years ago were Christians, they came because they wanted to be separate from the heavy-handedness of the established religions in Europe. They wanted to be free. And that sensibility was what led the early Americans and the framers of the Constitution to separate church from state. It is not that they were opposed to religion, they weren't, but they did not want one particular religion to have control within the government. At the very beginning, Christians, and especially Protestants, were the primary religious group in the country, but without any special legal status. And that was purposeful. Okay, so how shall we as today's Christians live in our country? What is our duty? What is our obligation? Well, as citizens of the country, individual states and local governments, we have an obligation to live within the legal expectations. As citizens, we need to pay our taxes and obey the laws, and I would add, vote. Okay, that makes sense. But as Christians, we are also citizens of God's kingdom. Does that have an effect? And if so, what effect is that? And what about our faith? Our faith underscores the importance of obeying the law and paying the taxes. That's true. And because we live in a democracy, also voting. But there are some things that are a little more tricky. As Christians, our allegiance is first to God and secondarily to country. But what if we were asked to do something that we thought God would not approve? What then? What would we do? Back in the 1960s and 70s, the United States was engaged in a war, and there were Christians who did not believe that God would approve of that war, and so they applied for conscientious objector status, or just refused to go, or went to Canada. And there were conscientious objectors in World War I and World War II. And some denominations, such as Mennonites, Amish, Quakers, Seventh-day Adventists, and Church of the Brethren, are opposed to war and have been respected for their views. The question of war and fighting in a war has been one place where religious viewpoints came into conflict with cultural or governmental expectations. Truth is, policies within the United States are not going to satisfy every religious group. Back in the 1900s, some American Christians argued that alcoholic beverages were an evil and menace in our country, and because of their viewpoint, the 18th Amendment became part of the Constitution. They had the right to their viewpoint, but not everybody agreed. The Catholic Church teaches that human life begins with conception, and that therefore abortion at any stage of development is murder and should be outlawed. Not all Christians agree, and not all Americans agree either, and there is not a clear voice in the medical profession. There are Christians who believe that capital punishment would not be okay in God's eyes. We Christians are not going to agree with everything and with each other. And we are not going to agree with the government always. So do the churches have a right and even an obligation to speak up when they believe that the government is in the wrong? That's a tricky question. Martin Luther King Jr. got himself in a lot of trouble when he spoke up against the Vietnam War. He had been a powerful leader in the civil rights movement, but when he spoke against President Lyndon Johnson and the war, he lost respect of many people. King thought that he had a moral obligation to do that, but others said that he was mixing church and state. Some Christian groups have become outspoken about political issues and even politics, and it has become rather tricky stuff, mixing religion and politics. Many pastors, churches, and denominations refrain from actively and openly endorsing candidates and political parties because they don't want to offend people and because they are concerned about the separation of church and state. So, What do we as Christians do in a day like ours? I've watched with disgust recent political campaigns in our country. I have seen name-calling, meanness, and what I suspect is a lack of truthfulness coming from so many different directions. I do not believe that God is at all pleased with what is happening. So what does God want us to do? For one, I think God wants us to be very thoughtful about the issues. So some issues revolve around poverty, healthcare, the environment, international issues, taxes. What are some of the specifics, and what do you think that God would say? There are some very loud voices and some very knee-jerk reactions. But as Christians, it is important that we be thoughtful and consider what we think Jesus would want us to do. Secondly, I think God wants us to have high expectations for our representatives and leaders. Our leaders represent us. They represent us in the world. Are they truthful? Always? Some politicians are just plain not honest. Their words cannot be trusted. Do they show respect for other people? Jesus teaches us that respect should be a core value among us. Our politicians must value people and their welfare. Do they show respect for those who disagree with them? Yes? No? Are they self-centered? Do they really know what they are doing? Are they really qualified? Or are they in over their heads? Is this person healthy? Physical health is important, yes, but even more important is emotional and mental health. Is this person healthy? Is this person someone you could point to as a kind person? Would you want this person to be a role model? If not, do not give them your vote. Our elected officials will not all be Christians, no. They cannot be. But they must be, absolutely must be, good, moral people. And we should want nothing less. And we must never vote for anything less. What we as American citizens do must absolutely reflect our commitment to God and to the gospel of Jesus Christ.